Happy New Year, everyone. Jeff, Sara, Cheryl, and I are sharing some thoughts on this video as a lead-in to our special church meeting regarding name change. In the 7 months that we've been contemplating name change, there have been some questions and concerns raised by members attending the town halls, the courtyard sessions, the one-on-ones, or else sent in via email. So that we can all have the same information going into the church meeting, we want to respond to some of these common concerns now so that the main focus of the church meeting next week can be on the primary question of, should we change the name? Starting us off here will be Cheryl Southard, the vice moderator.
I would like to address the concerns expressed about process and possible council overreach. When I was asked to join the council, I was hesitant at first because I knew the church had been declining in membership for a while. My hope in joining the council was that I might contribute to a fresh start, to new growth. I envisioned all of us working together to have a bigger impact in our community, a community that welcomed everyone, that brought the gospel, justice, love, and mercy to the community, a place where we weren't afraid to trust God's leading. Then the idea of a name change, which had been discussed several times in the past, was brought up again. At that time, it was discussed at a lay leadership summit and at council meetings. The question was, would changing our name better reflect who we were? Did the current name present an issue to others? We posed these questions to several of our key constituents, including our mission partners, both inside and outside of the church, and asked them, had they encountered issues with the term or name Colonial? And the immediate answer was yes. We also talked to young people and families, one of the critical audience that this church body, through the reforming process, had asked us to target for membership. That audience, too, expressed concern with the current name. Based on all of those findings, the church council made the motion which is being presented to you. As a leadership group charged with the care and growth of this congregation, the council is asking if you would be willing to consider a name change. On Sunday, you will vote on that motion. If that motion passes, we will then discuss options for a new name, present them to you, and the congregation will vote on a new name. The issue created by a pandemic, in the midst of wrestling with this question, was not predicted when the process began. It is, however, a fact of life now. To deal with it, council provided multiple ways and opportunities for engagement. It provided a summary paper with sound theological gospel reasons for changing the name. Courtyard conversations were set up for discussion to allow any and all to provide their input. Town hall meetings were held and email opportunities were created with the same objective. I personally believe this name change will help us lean into a new vision for this congregation. I believe it acknowledges to our community that we know the name presents a hurdle for many. During our inquiries, discussions, and correspondence, we have heard from some in our church family that they are hurt and affected by the name. I'm willing to take a leap of faith, knowing that God will provide a way forward through this change of name. Are you?
Well, hi, I'm Sara, one of the ministers here at the church. And I wanted to speak a little bit about who's saying that there's issues with our name and why are we considering this name change? For those of you who tuned in for the Lessons in Carol service, you may remember how I began by speaking about that famous Shakespearean play, Romeo and Juliet. In a world in which Montagues and Capulets were divided and killing one another, two young people fell in love. As Shakespeare penned, a rose by any other name would be as sweet because there was a recognition that their very names precluded their ability to actually realize love in the midst of their relationship. And so Romeo says, so let my name be love, who cares? Now, of course, considering something like a name change isn't so glib as that, because it's our stories and our lives. And yet, as a people who are gathered together, we are people who seek to be about love. And the reality is, as many of you have known, from the times you spent on mission trips in other countries, there have been times where we haven't even told people what our actual church name is, because the word colonial has evoked violence and oppression. That's not who we are. It's not why we picked this name. We did it because of the heritage of congregationalism and because some of the best of the legacy in this country. So as we look to these next 75 years, though, we want to be a people who open ourselves to hear from our brothers and sisters who are saying, hey, wait, what? Now for me, this question about changing our name, although recognizing it, it brings up a lot. For me, I grew up in the 80s in the church growth movement. I came of age in church plants like Faith Community Church and Westwood Community Church. My family had been a part of a community that many of you know as Grace Church. At the time, though, it was called Edina Baptist. And the reason for the change from Edina Baptist to Grace Church, the reason I grew up in community churches and not technically Baptist churches, was because of a recognition that the name Baptist itself was an impediment to being able to share the gospel. And that's part of why we are considering this name change. We are a people who are about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we don't want our name to be the stumbling block that prevents people from being able to engage with the beauty and the goodness of what God's Spirit has done and will do in our midst and through God's work in the midst of our community. This is why, for instance, my aunt and uncle who've been on staff with a thing called Campus Crusade for Christ at one point, they changed their name to Cru, because they recognize that as an organization, although they selected the name Campus Crusade for Christ because they wanted to win campuses for Jesus Christ, they wanted to have crusades where people came in contact with Jesus and had their lives changed, that the actual legacy of the crusades in our world was something that was bloodied and did not represent what a call to transformation and being a born-again Christian meant. And so they changed their name to Cru. And that is how Cru is known on college campuses, on ministry organizations throughout the world. Their mission hasn't changed, to win, to build, and to send, and our mission has not changed either. We want to be a people, though, who in view of this say yes to our siblings and consider then changing our name as a way for us to further this good work. So that's why we're doing it. That's why we're considering this, because we don't want to be a people whose name become an impediment to the work of the good news of Jesus Christ that God is going to continue to do in our midst.
I want to address a couple of the questions that have come up over and over and over again in my conversations with members of our church. If we're going to change the name, what's the new name going to be? And if we do change our name, if we vote to change our name, is that going to undo all of our history? Somehow undo our past? We've been advised by some of our membership that we should be leading towards something as opposed to leading away from something, which is usually good advice. But we have taken this vote to the church and asked the church to advise the leadership. Is this the direction we should go? Should we change our name? And if we change our name, we will gather a group of people in the life of this church. We will look for some outside help, and we will come up with a name that will help us move into our future. If you vote to change your name, if we vote to change the church's name, we are looking for the possibilities of what God might do leading us into our future. Can a change of name wipe out history? Absolutely not. I couldn't, even if I wanted to, change a wonderful ministry that this church has had over the last 75 years. We have responded to the needs of our community, responded to the needs of the world. We have stepped into uncomfortable places time after time because that's who we are as a church. Our name has nothing to do with that. As you've already heard, it's the people of this church led by God's Spirit. Well, I want us to build on our past history and to look into a bright future, continuing to follow the path that previous membership have directed us to be and to do. I want us to follow our core values that have been thought through and prayed for and already are deeply immersed in the life of our church. I want us to be a welcoming church. I want us to take risks. I want us to wrestle I want us to immerse ourselves in sacred practices, and I want us to do good for Christ's sake. And so by changing our name, we can tell the community around us that we're not tone deaf. We realize what's happening, what has been happening, and we want to change our name to respond to the needs of our community. We often think that we're doing this because of some outside group needs us to do this. No, we need to do this for ourselves, to take a humble assessment of ourselves, to look at ourselves and say, are we ready for the Spirit to lead us forward? Are we ready to build on the past for the hope of the future? And lastly, to change our name gives us the opportunity to choose a name that will be more missionally focused, that help us to better understand and identify ourselves and where we're going, who we want to be going forward. And so, my friends, as we think about this name change idea, it's not because we're wiping out the past. It's because we're looking to the future, led by God's Spirit, to do what this church has always done, to listen carefully to the needs of the world around us, and to step into those difficult places to make a difference. Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wants to be my follower, you got to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. That is a death to our will, to follow the will of God. This idea of a name change creates the possibility of us listening to the leading of the Spirit in new ways, for the new ways that God's going to take this congregation and do good for Christ's sake.
Some members have been concerned that the name change initiative is a knee-jerk reaction to George Floyd's death, and that therefore name change is somehow politically motivated. And this has often been followed up with the additional thought that we shouldn't try to take this on now during a pandemic. First, let me tell you that I don't know, and I don't care, frankly, what the political leanings are of my fellow council members. It's not been a topic even once as we have considered name change or any other matter, and it shouldn't be either. Name change at its core is a spiritual question, not a political one. And each one of us has to decide in our own hearts if the word colonial is spiritually correct, not if it is politically correct. Let me be clear in my opinion. The colonies were the birthplace of what became the greatest democracy the world has ever seen. But when you face the fact that every single one of the colonies embraced slavery, it becomes clear to me that the name colonial is not appropriate. Frankly, the word colonial doesn't do justice to how wonderful this congregation has been in the past and can be going forward. This is not a bad congregation with a good name. This is a great congregation with a storied past and a wonderful Spirit-led future that is currently saddled with a bad name. Regarding the question of why do this now, during a pandemic and time of racial unrest, let me quote an unlikely source for a Protestant like myself, and that is Pope Francis. This is from an article he wrote at Thanksgiving titled, "A Crisis Reveals What is in Our Hearts." And the subtitle says, "To come out of this pandemic better than we went in, we must let ourselves be touched by others' pain." As in the COVID-19 lockdown, those moments generate a tension, a crisis that reveals what is in our hearts. That's why we should act now during a pandemic. That's what's in my heart. What's in your heart? These two questions, however, really beg the question of what constitutes good lay leadership, and more importantly, good ministry leadership in a congregational church during uncertain times. You know, there was a quote in the paper the other day that sums this up pretty well. It said, "The greatest challenges for leaders never come when times are good. They come when society is at its most imperiled." Well, this last year has had the twin perils of the pandemic and racial unrest. Organizations all over the world have reconsidered their stance on race. Cheryl and I didn't plan on being your moderators during this time, and neither did our fellow council members. Jeff and Sara and the rest of the ministry staff certainly didn't plan on it either. But we all tried to rise to the challenge together. This rising to the challenge started with bringing forward a growth budget that would allow Jeff to build out his ministry team, resulting in world-class people like Christian, Andrew, Mark, Paul, Leah, and George joining Jeff and Sara, and who together have been spiritual first responders during this very challenging time. I encourage you to pray for and to thank our ministry team for carrying a very heavy burden during this time, and for indeed being there for our entire congregation. And I'd like to thank all of you for the generosity of spirit that you've showed by voting for an increased budget in the face of all the uncertainties the pandemic was causing. And along the way, of course, you also voted in the $1 million for the Blessing Initiative, which meant we already had money in our operating funds so that early on we could send $200,000 to our existing nonprofit partners who were already feeling the financial effects of the pandemic. Let me leave you with this thought. All of council and all of the ministry staff are in strong agreement that we should change the name of our church. That's what's in our heart. The remaining question is, what's in your heart? We hope you'll come share it with us on January 10th at 11 o'clock on Zoom. Thank you.